Warren sat alone at a small, corner table of the Sunflower Diner in rural Virginia, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee. The early morning sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, casting long, slanted shadows across the linoleum floor. Outside, the world seemed calm, quiet, ordinary, the kind of morning that lulled townsfolk into a sense of comfort. Inside, his presence went almost unnoticed, though a few patrons cast quick, curious glances at the woman who seemed almost painfully ordinary. She wasn't flashy, nor did she demand attention. Her brown hair was pulled back loosely, and she wore a plain gray jacket over faded jeans. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible alertness in the way she held herself, as though every muscle remembered something the world had long forgotten. Life since leaving the Navy had been deliberately quiet. 20 years of service in the SEALs, most of it in classified assignments, had left her with experiences she rarely discussed. In combat zones from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Southeast Asia, she had learned lessons about discipline, patience, and survival that most people couldn't begin to understand. She had witnessed the fragility of life up close, and in doing so, had mastered the art of quiet observation. Now in civilian life, she preferred her silence. She didn't seek recognition or fame, she merely wanted peace. Yet peace, as she had learned long ago, often required vigilance. Her senses were honed, trained over decades to notice the slightest shift in behavior. Even now, she could feel the subtle changes in the diner's atmosphere, the slight increase in chatter, the tension under the laughter of a man who clearly thought he was more intimidating than he was. A group of 3 men had just entered, their boots thudding on the linoleum, their voices loud enough to carry across the room. They were the kind who believed volume equaled authority, who assumed fear would naturally follow. Didn't flinch, didn't raise her gaze immediately. Instead, she took a measured sip of coffee, letting the warmth calm her nerves and keep her breathing steady. The men were loud and brash, joking at one another's expense and throwing sideways glances her way. "Look at that," one said with a smirk. "She's just sitting there like she owns the place." Another laughed. "Bet she's one of those weak types who'll cry if someone even bumps her." The third elbowed the first, a grin spreading across his face. "Worthless, probably." The words were sharp, filled with a cruel confidence, meant to intimidate anyone who might overhear. His lips remained a straight line, her expression calm, almost serene. She had faced far worse than mockery and bravado. A single glance, a single misstep from one of these men, and she could dismantle them with efficiency honed over 2 decades of training. But she didn't want to. Not yet. Her coffee had cooled slightly, but she ignored it, her attention fully on the men. Years in the SEALs had taught her to watch patterns, to anticipate movements before they happened. She observed their stances, the way their shoulders tensed, how their eyes darted toward her table. Nothing about them screamed danger, not real danger, but arrogance. Overconfidence was dangerous, especially when paired with ignorance. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible shift in posture, straightening her back and letting her gaze wander around the diner. She noted the elderly couple in the booth nearby, the teenage girl scribbling in a notebook, and the waitress, nervously adjusting her apron. The world hadn't noticed her yet, but she had noticed everything. The waitress approached, a tentative smile on her face. "Coffee okay, ma'am?" she asked, nodded. "It's perfect, thank you," she replied quietly. Her voice was soft, even gentle, but there was an unspoken authority beneath it, an underlying confidence that she alone commanded. The waitress didn't press further, sensing there was nothing more to ask, nothing to pry into. His presence alone spoke volumes. She had mastered the art of making herself small when necessary, invisible when desired, but still, somehow, commanding awareness. The 3 men moved closer to her table, laughing now louder. "What's a lady like you doing out here all alone?" one asked, a sneer on his face. "Bet you're some boring little nobody." Gaze flicked toward them, sharp but calm. She didn't respond immediately. In her experience, silence could be far more powerful than words. She assessed them quickly, no weapons, no real threat beyond bravado. Yet she could see the potential for escalation. It was in their hands whether this encounter remained harmless or became something else entirely. One man leaned forward, speaking just above a whisper now meant only for her. "You're worth nothing, aren't you?" The words hit a nerve only superficially. Felt a twinge of irritation, not because they had insulted her, but because ignorance often led to foolish mistakes. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Patrons glanced at each other, sensing tension but unsure of the cause. His body remained relaxed, but internally she was calculating. Every movement, every possible response, ran through her mind in precise sequences. She had trained for situations far worse than this. Then came the slap. One of the men, frustrated by her continued silence, reached out and struck her across the cheek. A collective gasp went through the diner. Her head tilted slightly, just enough to absorb the force without losing balance. Her voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the shock. "Don't touch me again," she said. The words were measured, unshaken, carrying the weight of experience and authority. Time seemed to slow as everyone processed the scene. A woman struck, yet not recoiling, not panicking. Instead, she radiated controlled power, the quiet before a storm most people could not comprehend. The men laughed nervously, thinking her calm a sign of weakness. They didn't know that every second she had spent in the SEALs had prepared her for far worse. Every mission, every firefight, every operation where failure meant death, had built her reflexes, her instincts, her ability to read a room in a fraction of a second. Her eyes flicked subtly to the nearest exit, calculating distances, weights, trajectories. This was no ordinary diner confrontation. In another life, in another context, this could have turned deadly but controlled the situation. Always. Nearby, a retired veteran noticed something subtle: the way her wrist flexed, the faint tattoo partially hidden under her sleeve. He leaned slightly toward the waitress. "Ma'am, she's a SEAL," he whispered. The words hung in the air, almost magical, though no one else fully understood their significance. The tension in the diner shifted slightly, though the men remained oblivious. Now standing slowly, deliberate in her movements, prepared to respond not with anger but with precision. She wasn't seeking revenge, but she was ready to defend herself if necessary. By the time placed her coffee down, straightened her jacket, and lifted her gaze fully, the diner had become a stage. Patrons held their breath. The men, still laughing nervously, were on the brink of realizing they had underestimated someone they believed powerless. In that moment, Warren was not merely a quiet woman in a corner. She was a seasoned warrior, composed, calculating, and ready. The first act of the encounter had ended, but the story was only beginning. The three men moved closer to his table, their swagger exaggerated, their laughter echoing off the walls of the Sunflower Diner. They believed confidence and volume were all they needed to command attention, to intimidate anyone who dared to cross them. Their eyes lingered on her, not with curiosity but with mockery, as if the calm, composed woman sipping coffee were a blank canvas for their cruelty. One of them leaned casually against the table, deliberately blocking her exit. "So, lady," he said, grinning, "what's a quiet little thing like you doing here? Don't tell me you're waiting for someone to rescue you." Kept her eyes level, her movements minimal, every inch of her posture carefully controlled. To an outsider, she appeared serene, almost fragile. But behind her calm exterior, her mind was alive with calculations, distances, angles, potential threats, and escape routes. Her training in the SEALs had ingrained in her an almost supernatural awareness. Every sound, every shift of weight, every subtle glance from the men spoke volumes. This was not just arrogance they were displaying. This was ignorance, and ignorance could be dangerous when combined with boldness. The second man snorted, leaning across the table now, his face inches from hers. "I bet you don't even know how to fight," he sneered. "Probably can't even defend yourself if someone slapped you." His voice was loud, designed to draw attention, to shame her into reaction. Patrons glanced nervously, sensing the tension rising, unsure whether to intervene. His lips remained pressed together in a thin line, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. She didn't flinch. She didn't react. Her entire body, trained to respond to aggression in milliseconds, was perfectly still, the calm before a storm. She took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth ground her, steady her breathing, and buy herself a fraction of time. Time, she knew, was critical. A single wrong reaction could escalate this minor confrontation into something far more serious. Yet she also knew that the longer she allowed them to act recklessly, the greater their risk. SEAL training had taught her patience, patience in chaos, patience in the face of danger, patience in life-and-death scenarios. This was nothing compared to the firefights and covert operations she had survived, but it was still a test of control. The third man, who had been silent until now, suddenly smirked. "Look at her," he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "She's sitting there like she's worth something. Pathetic. Bet she's scared of a little fun." Fun. The word dripped with condescension. Gaze flicked briefly to him, her eyes locking on his with a quiet intensity that made even the veterans in the diner shift slightly in their seats. This was not fear. This was measured focus. She knew exactly how to neutralize someone twice their size if necessary, and she had done it countless times. The men began circling her table, subtly at first, like predators assessing prey. Their arrogance had blinded them to the signals was sending, the subtle shift of her weight, the tightening of her hands around the cup, the minimal but precise positioning of her feet. She was ready, fully aware, and fully capable of defending herself, yet she didn't strike. Violence was always a last resort. In her experience, letting someone reveal their own foolishness often achieved more than raw aggression. Still, they were pushing her patience, and every moment they continued their provocation, they were unknowingly stepping closer to consequences they could not imagine. "Hey, little lady," the first man said, leaning even closer, "I said you're worthless. Don't pretend you're not scared." His hand grazed her arm, light but deliberate, a challenge wrapped in arrogance. His eyes narrowed just slightly. Her voice, calm but cold, broke the tense quiet. "Do not touch me again," she said clearly, without raising her tone. The words were simple, but they carried authority that comes from experience, from a lifetime of knowing that underestimating someone like her was a grave mistake. The men laughed nervously, thinking it was a bluff, a weak warning. The diner's atmosphere grew heavier. Patrons were now fully aware that something significant was unfolding. They whispered among themselves, eyes flicking toward the corner table. The waitress, hands trembling, discreetly dialed the diner's back line to alert the owner, hoping someone would intervene before things escalated. Meanwhile, the men continued their mockery, now emboldened by the silence and perceived compliance. One of them, impatient, slapped her arm lightly, testing her reaction. Did not flinch. She didn't flinch physically, but internally her body reacted immediately. Every nerve fired, every muscle prepared. Her SEAL training kicked in automatically, ingrained into her reflexes over decades of high-stakes operations. A retired veteran sitting across the room finally noticed the small, discreet tattoo on his wrist, a mark he recognized instantly. It was a subtle but unmistakable symbol of SEAL completion, reserved only for Tier 1 operators. His eyes widened slightly. He whispered to the waitress, "Ma'am, she's a SEAL." The words were almost lost amid the din, but for the few who recognized their meaning, the tension shifted. Fear mingled with awe. The men remained oblivious, continuing their harassment, unaware that the woman they were tormenting had survived situations that would make them pale in comparison. One of the men, frustrated by her continued lack of reaction, grew bolder. "I bet you can't even fight back if I hit you," he taunted, stepping closer, his hand raised as though to slap her again. Gaze didn't waver. Time seemed to slow. Her mind replayed 1,000 scenarios, where to place her weight, how to move to gain advantage, how to control the threat with minimal force. This was instinct, honed over decades of training, yet controlled with absolute precision. Every action was deliberate, every movement purposeful. The men's laughter faltered slightly, but arrogance still blinded them. They assumed her calm was fear or perhaps resignation. They didn't know that Warren's silence was not weakness but a weapon in itself. Her entire life had prepared her for moments like this, moments when patience, observation, and subtle control were more powerful than brute force. She didn't need to strike yet. They were doing all the work for her, exposing their own vulnerability through ignorance and arrogance. The waitress, sensing the tension, whispered softly to the other staff. "Something's not right, she's not scared." Her voice trembled, revealing her unease. Even she didn't know why, but instinctively she recognized the calm authority in. It was unlike anything she had seen before, a quiet strength that demanded respect even when unspoken. Around the diner, patrons began to shift, some subtly moving their chairs closer to exits, others leaning back, uncertain of what might unfold. The tension was palpable, electric, charged with anticipation. And then, as if triggered by their own impatience, the first man reached out and struck her cheek lightly but with intent. Gasps echoed. Head tilted just enough to absorb the force without losing balance, her body perfectly aligned. She took a single, deep, controlled breath, and her eyes locked on the aggressor. The diner fell silent. Her voice, calm but deadly serious, cut through the room. "Do not touch me again." The words were measured, deliberate, and final. Time seemed to hang. Everyone could feel the weight of experience behind them. This was not a threat, it was a promise. The men's confidence wavered slightly, though they tried to mask it with nervous laughter. They didn't yet understand the gravity of what they had just provoked. Hands, still resting lightly on the table, twitched subtly, not in anger but in readiness. Every fiber of her being was alert, honed by decades of combat, reconnaissance, and survival. She was calm, but the calm of a storm that could strike without warning. For those who recognized the signs, the message was clear. This was not a woman to be underestimated. And in that quiet moment, Warren became more than a diner patron. She became a living testament to discipline, to patience, to the silent power forged through 20 years of Navy SEAL service. Outside the window, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Inside, the diner had become a crucible, a stage where arrogance and ignorance were about to meet experience, skill, and precision. The story, long dormant and hidden beneath ordinary appearances, was just beginning to reveal itself. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Patrons leaned forward in their seats, the morning light catching their anxious expressions. Even the waitress paused mid-step, hands trembling over a tray of coffee cups. Warren remained seated, her posture relaxed but deceptively alert. Every muscle in her body was primed, ready to respond with precision. Years in the SEALs had conditioned her to read threats within milliseconds, to calculate angles, distances, and probabilities while maintaining perfect composure. She wasn't merely calm. She was a predator in waiting, a storm hidden behind the veneer of ordinary. The first man, emboldened by the lack of immediate reaction, smirked. He leaned across the table again, his hand striking her cheek lightly, a test masked as aggression. Gasps echoed across the diner. Time seemed to slow for her. Head tilted just enough to absorb the impact without losing balance, her body poised to react but still perfectly composed. She took a deep breath, controlled, measured, as though drawing on decades of experience to remain utterly unfazed. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "Do not touch me again." The words were not a threat, they were a command. Every nerve in her body hummed with readiness, calibrated to respond to any sudden movement. The diner went silent. Patrons instinctively sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding, though most could not articulate why. The men, however, still did not fully grasp the situation. Their arrogance had blinded them. They mistook her silence and calm for fear or submission. The second man, thinking the first had merely startled her, reached out to grab her arm. His fingers brushed her sleeve, just enough to provoke. Eyes narrowed slightly, and in that instant her entire body moved with the precision of someone trained for life-and-death situations. The motion was imperceptibly slow to the untrained eye, but executed with perfect control. She twisted his wrist into a painful lock, the joint locking just enough to immobilize without injury. He grunted in surprise, losing balance, and stumbled into the table beside him. The first man, shocked, tried to step forward again, but's body anticipated every movement. She shifted her weight subtly, planting her feet in a stance honed by years of combat drills. With a deft, almost invisible motion, she redirected his momentum, sending him sprawling onto the floor. The sound of bodies hitting linoleum echoed sharply, punctuating the silence of the diner. The patrons were frozen, some staring in awe, some in disbelief, as the woman they had dismissed as weak moved with the precision and confidence of a trained warrior. The third man, wide-eyed now, realized the situation had escalated far beyond his expectations. He attempted a grab, reckless and panicked, his confidence evaporating, fluidly using minimal force to redirect him into a nearby chair. The chair tipped, clattering to the floor. She maintained perfect composure, breathing steady, eyes locked on her remaining opponent. To anyone watching, it seemed almost effortless. A woman handling three men with subtle movements, without shouting, without striking indiscriminately, relying entirely on skill and training. The diner's patrons whispered among themselves. Some had recognized subtle signs in its movements, the way her shoulders shifted, how her stance was balanced yet ready to spring, the small but deliberate alignment of her hands. A retired veteran at a nearby table could not hide his astonishment. He leaned toward the waitress, whispering, "She's a SEAL. There's no doubt." The words barely carried across the room, but they were enough for those with experience to understand the reality of the situation. This was not a fight of brute strength. This was a display of elite training. The first man, scrambling to regain his footing, now regarded her with genuine fear. His previous bravado crumbled as he realized he had misjudged the woman before him. Every instinct in his body told her the confrontation could escalate further if she didn't neutralize the threat efficiently. Yet she did not act with anger, nor with aggression. She acted with calculated precision, ensuring control without unnecessary harm. It was a philosophy ingrained through decades of service: efficiency over violence, discipline over chaos. The second man, still entangled in the wrist Locke had applied, tried to free himself, but her grip was unyielding yet controlled. Pain, not injury, was enough to command compliance. Her eyes never left the third man, whose hesitation was now apparent. Panic flickered across his face, his movements uncoordinated and hasty. Shifted her stance slightly, just enough to assert dominance without a single punch. Her entire presence communicated a simple, undeniable truth. Any further aggression would be met with mastery she had refined over 20 years. For the patrons, the scene was mesmerizing. Some whispered about martial arts, others about military training, but none could fully comprehend the level of control and awareness she displayed. She was not merely reacting. She was predicting, controlling, and guiding the chaos around her. It was a demonstration of skill so precise that even the aggressors could not understand their vulnerability until it was too late. Each movement was deliberate, each adjustment purposeful, a testament to a lifetime of rigorous preparation. The men, realizing that force alone would not win this confrontation, tried to flee. But positioning subtly blocked their escape routes without aggression, guiding them toward compliance. Patrons could see the fear in their eyes, the stark realization that this was no ordinary woman they had provoked. The first man stumbled, glancing helplessly at the floor, while the second still attempted to free his wrist, and the third backed away slowly, avoiding eye contact. Remained calm, steady, almost serene in her control of the room. A single patron, a middle-aged man sitting near the counter, whispered under his breath, "She's unbelievable, she didn't even need to hit them." His words echoed the collective awe building in the room. His methods were subtle but effective. She had neutralized 3 aggressive men without overt violence, relying entirely on discipline, awareness, and precision. Every SEAL mission, every combat scenario she had endured, every moment of training had prepared her for this kind of high-pressure, high-stakes confrontation. And yet, to her, it was still just another situation to manage efficiently. As the last man backed against a wall, finally exhaled slightly, loosening her posture but maintaining alertness. She did not gloat, nor did she speak. Her control of the situation had been complete. Patrons slowly began to recover from shock, murmuring among themselves, eyes wide with astonishment. Some glanced at the waitress, who seemed frozen, her hands still shaking. His calm presence dominated the room. She had demonstrated a level of control that transcended brute force or intimidation. She was a master of situational dominance, and everyone present had witnessed it. And then, almost imperceptibly, the retired veteran leaned closer to the waitress again, whispering, "Ma'am, that's a Navy SEAL. A real one, 20 years, combat missions. She's not joking. Don't ever underestimate her." The words, once spoken, carried a gravity that the men could no longer ignore. Their arrogance had collapsed under the weight of reality. They had provoked someone far beyond their comprehension, a veteran whose life had been defined by extreme danger, discipline, and survival. Returned to her seat, folding her hands calmly over her coffee cup. Her movements were minimal but purposeful, signaling that the confrontation was over. She did not gloat, did not seek acknowledgement. The men sat in stunned silence, recovering slowly from the shock of their own misjudgment. Patrons continued to stare, some leaning back in disbelief, some murmuring in awe. Even the waitress, now aware of the truth, could only nod in quiet respect. The quiet stranger in the corner of the diner had revealed a fragment of her past, a glimpse into the life she had led, and the power she carried silently. She had faced the aggression with precision, control, and mastery, demonstrating that strength often spoke loudest when unannounced. The men had learned a hard lesson. Arrogance and ignorance are fragile when confronted by experience and skill. And Warren, the woman they had mocked, remained calm, collected, and untouchable, her presence alone commanding respect. The diner seemed frozen in a strange kind of awe. The clatter of cups and silverware, once ordinary, had faded into the background as everyone processed what had just unfolded. Warren returned to her seat, folding her hands over her coffee cup with deliberate calm. Her movements were controlled, precise, almost ritualistic, a physical manifestation of the discipline instilled in her through decades of Navy SEAL training. The three men who had mocked her sat in stunned silence, their previous arrogance evaporated into confusion, embarrassment, and fear. One of the patrons, a retired Army veteran named Carl, leaned slightly forward from his booth near the counter. His eyes narrowed as he studied posture, her controlled breathing, and the subtle alignment of her body even after the confrontation had seemingly ended. There was something about her movements, the way she had shifted weight, the precision with which she neutralized the men, the way she had anticipated their every reaction, that screamed professional training. Carl had served overseas, seen more than his share of combat, and yet what he had just witnessed in a small diner in Virginia rivaled the discipline he had only seen in Tier 1 operators. His gaze fell on a subtle tattoo peeking from under sleeve, a small, intricate symbol of the Navy SEAL trident. It was not meant to be flashy, not designed to draw attention. Most civilians would not recognize it, but to anyone trained in military or special operations, it was unmistakable. Carl's breath caught. He leaned toward the waitress, speaking in a low, urgent whisper. "Ma'am, she's a SEAL," he said, barely audible over the soft hum of the diner's ventilation system. His words carried a weight of awe and respect that seemed to ripple through the room, even if the others didn't yet fully comprehend their meaning. The men who had instigated the confrontation remained on edge, trying to recover from the shock of their defeat. The first man rubbed his wrist where had twisted it, grimacing. "What the hell just happened?" he muttered under his breath. The second and third men exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado completely gone. They could not articulate what had just occurred, only that they had been overpowered with efficiency, skill, and precision by someone they had assumed was weak. The realization that they had underestimated their target began to settle in. His calmness remained unshaken. She had no desire to humiliate anyone unnecessarily. Her focus was control, not revenge. Yet the truth of her identity was now spreading through the diner, thanks to Carl's subtle whisper. Patrons who had not witnessed military operations before felt a shift in the atmosphere. Something profound had occurred, something beyond a mere physical confrontation. This aura of discipline, calm authority, and unspoken strength had left its mark on everyone present. The waitress, hand still trembling, leaned closer to Carl. "A SEAL here," she whispered, disbelief evident in her voice. Carl nodded, his expression grave. Not just any SEAL, he said softly. A Tier 1 operator, 20 years in service. Combat missions overseas. She's not someone you mess with. The waitress's eyes widened and she glanced nervously toward who remained seated, calm, serene, yet alert to the environment. Her presence alone had shifted the dynamic of the room. The waitress felt a mixture of awe and relief, understanding that the woman in front of her was not only capable of defending herself, but had done so in a way that demonstrated precision and control rather than brute force. Outside the corner of her eye noticed the subtle movements of the three men. They were regrouping, trying to compose themselves, but their uncertainty was palpable. Her training taught her to anticipate reactions like these, to maintain dominance through presence and measured response. She shifted slightly in her chair, not threatening, not aggressive, simply repositioning to maintain situational control. The men noticed this, their instincts telling them they were still at a disadvantage. Their panic was silent but unmistakable. Carl, sensing the need for discretion, approached the men quietly. He said in a calm, firm tone, "You need to understand who you're dealing with. She's not just trained, she's elite. You came in here thinking you could intimidate her and you were wrong." The words struck the men harder than previous moves. Fear, a new and unfamiliar emotion for them, began to take root. They had underestimated someone they had assumed powerless, and the consequences of that misjudgment were now painfully clear. His gaze swept the diner. She noted the elderly couple in the booth near the window, their hands clutching each other nervously. The teenage girl scribbling in her notebook had stopped, pencil frozen mid-line. Patrons who had initially assumed this was a minor altercation now understood the gravity of the situation. Every movement made was deliberate, controlled, and purposeful. The room seemed to recognize that she had not only neutralized a threat, but done so with restraint, showing mastery without unnecessary aggression. The first man, his face pale and expression tense, muttered under his breath, I didn't know." The second man nodded slightly, avoiding eye contact, while the third shifted uncomfortably in place. They were finally beginning to grasp the reality. The quiet, seemingly ordinary woman in the corner of the diner was far from ordinary. Her calm presence, her subtle dominance of the situation, and the faint symbol on her wrist all pointed to a life defined by discipline, training, and survival. Carl returned to his seat, satisfied that the message had been received. He watched as picked up her coffee once more, taking a deliberate sip. Her composure never wavered, yet the air around her was charged with unspoken authority. The diner's patrons, now fully aware of the truth, felt a mixture of awe, respect, and relief. They had witnessed a rare display of skill, poise, and restraint, and they understood that what they had just seen was the result of decades of rigorous training and life-and-death experience. Men, finally recognizing their own vulnerability, slowly began to retreat toward the exit. There was no fight left in them, no arrogance remaining. Their earlier confidence had been shattered by the calm efficiency and silent authority of a Navy SEAL. As they shuffled out of the diner, their faces etched with disbelief and shame, remained seated, sipping her coffee as if nothing had happened. Her presence alone had communicated the truth. Strength is not always loud, and power does not always announce itself. The waitress approached cautiously, still shaken. "Ma'am, I don't even know what to say," she stammered, smiled faintly, a gesture gentle yet full of authority. "Peace is always the goal," she said softly. "Sometimes showing strength quietly is enough." Her words resonated, carrying weight far beyond the diner walls. Patrons nodded subtly, some whispering in agreement, recognizing the wisdom behind her calm and measured approach. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Birds chirped, sunlight danced across the pavement, and the distant hum of traffic went on uninterrupted. Inside, however, the dynamics of the diner had shifted irrevocably. The patrons would remember this encounter for years. The day a quiet, unassuming woman revealed, without arrogance or display, that her calm exterior masked the extraordinary discipline, training, and capability of a Navy SEAL. Warren, the quiet stranger in the corner, had left her mark not with violence, but with precision, composure, and undeniable presence. For the confrontation was over, but the lessons lingered. She had not sought recognition, nor had she needed it. The truth of her identity had been subtly revealed to those who understood, while those who had sought to harm her were left to grapple with their own ignorance. Discipline, awareness, and control, these were the tools she had carried throughout her life. And today, they had proven sufficient, quiet but undeniable in the small, seemingly ordinary stage of a roadside diner. Warren sat back in her chair, her coffee cup resting lightly in her hands, yet every fiber of her being remained alert. The three men, previously bold and arrogant, now hovered near the edges of the diner, uncertain and wary. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced by a creeping, inescapable fear. The entire room seemed to recognize that they were dealing with someone far beyond ordinary comprehension. Every patron instinctively stepped back slightly, creating a silent perimeter, sensing that the quiet woman in the corner possessed a command that demanded respect. Her movements were deliberate but subtle, her posture relaxed yet ready. Training in the SEALs had ingrained a philosophy of control through efficiency. There was no need for unnecessary force, no reason to escalate violence when precision and calm could neutralize the threat completely. The first man, now rubbing his wrist from the lock she had applied moments before, glanced at his companions with uncertainty. She's not joking," he whispered. The others nodded silently, their bravado completely gone. Fear had replaced arrogance. Shifted slightly in her chair, enough to realign her stance, preparing for any sudden movement from the men. Her hands remained near her lap, her fingers lightly flexing subtle, almost imperceptible signs to anyone untrained, but powerful indicators of readiness for someone with years of combat experience. Her eyes scanned the diner, noting potential escape routes, the distance between tables, and the angles from which the men could attempt any further aggression. Every variable was accounted for, analyzed and controlled. The second man, desperate to reclaim some sense of dominance, lunged suddenly toward her, his movements erratic and panicked. Reacted instinctively, her body moving fluidly, almost imperceptibly to anyone watching. She stepped to the side, redirecting his momentum and using it to guide him off balance. A small, calculated maneuver sent him crashing into a chair, the wooden legs tipping with a loud clatter. His panic intensified. He scrambled to his feet, trying to compose himself, but's presence was already asserting control. Every muscle in her body radiated calm precision, projecting authority without aggression. The first man, now recovering slightly, made a feeble attempt to grab her from behind. His head tilted just enough to see him out of the corner of her eye. She reacted with a seamless twist of her body, grabbing his arm and using leverage to redirect him into the floor with minimal effort but maximum control. He fell with a grunt, shocked not only by the technique but by the sheer efficiency of it. His movements were silent yet commanding, a testament to the countless hours of grueling training that had honed her reflexes to perfection. The third man, wide-eyed and trembling now, realized that their previous assumptions about her were catastrophically wrong. He tried to back away, but subtle positioning blocked any simple exit. She didn't need to strike him. Her presence alone dictated compliance. Her calm, unwavering focus projected a silent but absolute authority that left him frozen in place, uncertain whether to flee or surrender. The dynamic in the diner had shifted entirely. No one was questioning her strength. Everyone was questioning their own judgment. Patrons whispered in awe, some holding their breath, others leaning back in disbelief. They had witnessed a display of controlled power, discipline, and tactical precision that few could comprehend. Had neutralized three aggressive men without raising her voice, without throwing a single punch, and without causing lasting harm. Each movement was calculated, every reaction deliberate, a study in efficiency and control. The diner, once ordinary, had become a classroom in discipline and situational mastery, taught by someone who had lived life in extremes far beyond civilian experience. His eyes scanned the three men once more, noting their hesitation, their imbalance, and the subtle signals of surrender. She had no intention of causing them harm beyond what was necessary to restore order. Her SEAL training emphasized containment, control, and de-escalation, skills often more critical than raw combat ability. She adjusted her stance again, demonstrating through posture and presence that any further aggression would be met with precision beyond their comprehension. It was a lesson in mastery without malice, a rare blend of power and restraint. The first man attempted to lunge once more, his fear momentarily by frustration, anticipated the motion before it fully manifested. In one fluid movement, she intercepted his arm, twisting with precise leverage, sending him stumbling into the floor. The diner seemed to vibrate with the quiet intensity of the moment, the metallic clang of the chair legs echoing in the stunned silence. Patrons stared, some covering their mouths in shock, others gripping their chairs, aware that the calm woman in the corner was entirely in control of the situation. The second man tried to regain composure, taking a half step forward but had already moved subtly, her feet shifting just enough to block any attack. She applied a small, controlled lock on his wrist, enough to immobilize without injury. He yelped softly, realizing that force alone would not overcome her. His control was effortless yet absolute. Every motion was designed to neutralize threats, maintain dominance, and protect herself and those around her. Her training, experience, and discipline were evident in every deliberate action. The third man, finally recognizing the futility of resistance, froze entirely. Fear and respect mingled in his eyes. He realized the truth too late. They had underestimated someone whose life had been defined by high-stakes operations, where failure could mean death. His presence alone had conveyed authority. Her calm mastery had neutralized threats, and her skill had demonstrated that strength could exist quietly, without theatrics. She was the embodiment of controlled power, a living lesson in restraint and discipline. Patrons continued to murmur in awe. The waitress, now trembling less, approached cautiously. "Ma'am, I don't even know what to say," she stammered. Eyes softened ever so slightly, but her posture remained strong, unwavering. "Control, observation, and patience," she said quietly, her voice calm and measured. "Strength isn't in violence. Strength is in knowing when to act and how to act." The waitress nodded, understanding that these words were more than a reflection on the recent events. They were a glimpse into a lifetime defined by discipline, courage, and mastery. Outside, sunlight filtered through the diner windows, painting the floor in warm patterns. Inside, the air was charged, heavy with awe and tension. The three men, now thoroughly humbled, gathered their courage and backed toward the door, their arrogance replaced with fear and respect. Did not move to stop them. She didn't need to. Her presence alone ensured compliance. Patrons exhaled collectively, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others quietly muttering praise under their breath. Returned to her coffee, lifting the cup slowly and taking a sip. Her calm authority filled the room. The diner had witnessed more than a confrontation. It had witnessed a display of skill, discipline, and quiet power. No one present would forget the precision, efficiency, and mastery she had demonstrated. Warren, the quiet stranger in the corner, had neutralized aggression without a single raised voice, strike, or shout. The lesson was clear: never mistake silence for weakness. Carl, the retired veteran, nodded subtly toward the others, conveying what words could not. "She's a SEAL, elite, trained, experienced, 20 years of service." Even the men understood the truth now. Their fear was justified, their assumptions destroyed. His presence had reshaped their understanding of power and control. She had revealed only a fraction of her ability, yet it was enough to command respect, awe, and humility from everyone in the room. The calm storm that was Warren had passed, leaving behind order where chaos had threatened. Her discipline, patience, and precision had restored equilibrium without unnecessary violence, demonstrating the strength that comes not from brute force, but from control, experience, and confidence. Patrons would remember this moment, the quiet woman who had handled 3 aggressors effortlessly, with nothing more than awareness, skill, and unshakable composure. The tension in the Sunflower Diner lingered like an electric charge. Patrons whispered among themselves, some replaying the confrontation in their minds, others exchanging glances of awe and disbelief. The three men who had initiated the conflict now sat near the exit, heads lowered, shoulders slumped, their earlier bravado utterly extinguished. Every fiber of their being recognized the truth they had ignored for far too long. Warren was no ordinary woman. She was trained, disciplined, and lethal in ways they could scarcely comprehend. The muted sound of sirens reached the diner, growing louder as they approached. Someone had called the local authorities during the commotion, unsure of what had transpired but certain that the situation warranted intervention. Remained seated, hands resting lightly on the table, her posture calm and controlled. She did not flinch at the approaching police. She had dealt with far more dangerous individuals in hostile environments. Her composure projected authority, signaling to everyone present that she was neither a victim nor a threat in need of restraint. When the first patrol car screeched to a halt outside, officers jumped out, their hands hovering near their belts as they entered cautiously. "What's going on here?" one officer called, scanning the room. Patrons quickly pointed to the corner table, whispering among themselves. "These men started harassing her," someone said, voice shaky. "They struck her and, well, she defended herself." Raised her hand slightly, motioning for calm. Her presence, even without words, commanded attention. The officer's eyes instinctively registered the subtle cues of her posture, the steady confidence she radiated. The first officer approached the three men near the exit. "Sir, step aside," he instructed, voice firm. The men hesitantly, their earlier arrogance replaced with unease. His eyes followed every movement, noting the officers' positions, the space around her, and the subtle reactions of the diners. This was her environment now, and she maintained full situational awareness. Every person, every object, every potential obstacle was accounted for in her mental map. The senior officer, a seasoned veteran of the force, walked toward. He paused slightly, his eyes narrowing as he took in her calm demeanor. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "are you all right?" Nodded politely, her voice even and controlled. "I am fine," she said softly. "They initiated aggression. I simply defended myself." Her tone carried authority, calm yet unmistakably firm. The officer's gaze lingered on her for a moment, noting something indefinable in her presence. A discipline and confidence that spoke of a life shaped by rigorous training and high-stakes experience. The officers turned their attention to the three men, who now attempted to explain themselves in scattered, nervous words. Their story, incoherent and panicked, did little to mitigate the impression they had already made. Had handled the situation with precision and restraint. Any further narrative they offered only highlighted their recklessness. The senior officer sighed, shaking his head. "You'll have a lot of explaining to do," he said firmly. The men nodded mutely, still recovering from the shock of having been neutralized so efficiently. Meanwhile, patrons murmured among themselves, some seeking confirmation of what they had witnessed. "Did she just?" one woman whispered. "She didn't even throw a punch, did she?" Carl, the retired veteran, leaned toward a nearby table. "No," he said quietly. "That was a SEAL, trained for 20 years. Combat missions, survival operations. You don't get that kind of skill in any civilian program. She handled them without needing to hit hard, just control and leverage." The realization sank in, awe spreading like wildfire through the room. The officers, having assessed the situation, asked to step aside for a brief statement. She, moving with the same calm precision she had displayed throughout the encounter. Every step was measured, controlled, projecting confidence without aggression. The diner had become a study in discipline and authority. A woman whose calm mastery had neutralized chaos, and now stood formally under observation, yet still fully in command of the environment. As provided her account to the officers, she described events succinctly, leaving out unnecessary detail but emphasizing the facts. She had been approached, harassed, and struck. She had defended herself and ensured the aggressors could not continue their behavior. Her statements were concise, authoritative, and devoid of dramatics, reflecting the methodical clarity she had developed over decades of Navy SEAL operations. The officers listened, impressed by the calm and measured nature of her recounting. Meanwhile, the three men had been moved to a corner by the officers, their expressions a mixture of shame, fear, and lingering confusion. They had witnessed firsthand what they now could not deny. Warren was not someone to provoke. Even the senior officer, a veteran of numerous high-pressure situations, recognized the efficiency and control she had demonstrated. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "you handled this extremely well. I don't think I've ever seen anyone control a situation like that without resorting to excessive force." His eyes met his briefly, a faint nod acknowledging the compliment while maintaining her composed demeanor. Carl, watching from his booth, whispered to the waitress, "She's not just any SEAL, she's elite. A Tier 1 operator, 20 years in service, combat zones, missions that most people can't even imagine, and she just handled three aggressors like they were nothing." The waitress's eyes widened. "I can see it now," she murmured. "I knew something was different about her, calm, precise, not scared, not nervous, just in control." The words hung in the air, a quiet testament to unspoken authority. The officers began taking formal statements from witnesses. Patrons described the events with awe and clarity, emphasizing calm presence and precise movements. The collective testimony painted a picture not of chaos or violence, but of controlled authority and discipline. Remained composed throughout, her demeanor calm, her hands folded over her coffee cup, her gaze scanning the room to ensure no further disturbances. The entire diner had become a microcosm of order restored through skill, patience, and quiet mastery. Finally, the officers concluded their initial assessment. The three aggressors were informed that they would face potential charges for harassment and assault. They nodded mutely, their faces pale, fully aware that they had underestimated someone whose capabilities far exceeded their understanding. Remained seated, observing, composed, fully in command of the aftermath. Her presence alone communicated that the situation was under control, and that her authority, though quiet, was absolute. As the officers left, returned her focus to her coffee. Patrons continued to murmur, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding in quiet respect. Carl leaned toward her slightly, careful not to intrude. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I don't know if you want to share, but you really are a SEAL, aren't you? 20 years, smiled faintly, a gesture calm yet warm. "I was," she said simply. "For 20 years, I've seen a lot, done a lot. And I've learned that control is more powerful than aggression." Her words resonated throughout the diner. The patrons who had witnessed the event understood now that they had observed something rare and extraordinary. A lifetime of training, discipline, and experience condensed into moments of calm, precise action. Warren, the quiet woman who had seemed ordinary at first glance, had revealed a glimpse of a life defined by skill, courage, and mastery. And though she had only revealed a fraction of her capabilities, it was enough to leave an indelible mark on everyone present. The three men, now sitting outside on the curb under the watchful eyes of the officers, understood the lesson fully. They had misjudged the quiet stranger in the corner, and the consequences of their arrogance had been made unmistakably clear. This demonstration had been more than self-defense. It was a subtle, masterful exhibition of authority, discipline, and the lethal calm of a trained warrior. And as the diner slowly returned to normal, life outside its walls, unaware of the extraordinary display within, sipped her coffee, serene, composed, and fully aware that her quiet strength had spoken louder than words ever could. The aftermath had been handled with precision, and the lesson had been learned. Never underestimate someone who has walked through fire, and never assume calmness equals weakness. The diner had settled into a fragile calm. The clatter of dishes and hum of conversation had returned, but there was a new undercurrent in the room, a quiet reverence for the woman who had just commanded authority without a single raised voice. Warren sat at her table, hands folded around her coffee cup, the warmth of the drink grounding her. Her mind, however, was far from calm. She replayed the events in meticulous detail, analyzing every move, every reaction, every subtle shift in posture from both herself and the three aggressors. For 20 years had lived a life defined by extreme vigilance. Each mission, each operation, each second in hostile environments had honed her instincts to near perfection. The encounter in the diner was trivial by comparison, yet the principles remained the same. Assess the threat, control the environment, neutralize aggression efficiently, and preserve safety. Every action she had taken had been deliberate. She had allowed the men to reveal themselves, to escalate, and then she had responded with precision, ensuring no one was harmed unnecessarily. It was a balance of strength and restraint she had cultivated over decades. Carl, the retired veteran, remained nearby, observing with quiet admiration. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I've seen soldiers in training, veterans in combat simulations, but what you just did, that was extraordinary and so controlled. You didn't have to strike them, but you made them understand instantly. That's rare." Smiled faintly, the gesture gentle yet full of authority. "Control is everything," she said quietly. "Most people think power is about strength or volume. It isn't. True power is the ability to control a situation, and the people in it, without letting chaos take hold." The waitress, still a little shaken, approached carefully. I don't even know what to say," she admitted. "You handled it all so calmly, and everyone still in awe," nodded slightly. "Sometimes the best way to make people listen is to remain silent and let your actions speak." Her tone was soft, but each word carried the weight of experience. The waitress's eyes widened. You really were in the SEALs, weren't you?" Gave a faint nod, her expression serene. "Yes, 20 years. It taught me discipline, awareness, and patience, and that violence should always be the last resort." Patrons continued to murmur quietly, some approaching cautiously to thank her, others exchanging impressed glances with neighbors. She had become an unspoken center of the diner, not by raising her voice or seeking attention, but simply through her calm mastery. People were instinctively drawn to her presence, sensing the silent authority that radiated from someone trained in life-or-death situations, someone who had mastered the art of control. A young man at the counter, nervously adjusting his baseball cap, spoke up. "Ma'am, I don't know if you want to answer, but what was it like, being a SEAL?" Gaze softened slightly, her eyes reflecting a lifetime of memory and experience. "It was hard," she said quietly. "Physically, mentally, emotionally, it pushed every limit, but it also taught me who I am and what I'm capable of. And most importantly, it taught me that discipline and awareness matter more than brute force." She paused, letting the words sink in. Every operation, every mission, every encounter, even small ones like today, are opportunities to apply that discipline. The three men sat outside under the watchful eyes of the officers, silently absorbing the reality of the lesson they had learned. They had approached her thinking she was weak, powerless, and harmless. Now, fully aware of the depth of her skill, they could barely meet each other's eyes. Their fear was genuine, a humbling recognition of the mistake they had made. Had not attacked them recklessly, yet they had been rendered powerless by her control and presence alone. Reflected inwardly, thinking not of victory or pride but of responsibility. Her skill was not something she wielded lightly. In the SEALs, every action had consequences. Every decision carried weight. Even in a civilian setting like this diner, she had understood that her training was both a shield and a tool. She had the capacity for extreme action, yet she had chosen precision and restraint. That choice, she knew, spoke louder than any words could. Carl leaned closer to her again, speaking softly. "Ma'am, you have no idea how many people just witnessed in control. That was incredible." Gave a small smile. "It's not about impressing anyone," she said. "It's about keeping situations safe, minimizing harm, and asserting control when necessary. Most people never experience a true threat, but understanding the principles of awareness and calm can prevent disasters before they start." The waitress approached once more, this time more composed. "Would you maybe share some advice? I mean for us civilians." Considered this, then spoke thoughtfully. "Awareness is everything. Pay attention to your surroundings, trust your instincts, and remember, calmness is more powerful than panic. Most conflicts escalate because people react impulsively. If you can remain calm and assess, you almost always gain the advantage." Her words resonated deeply with those who had been in the diner. They had seen the truth of her advice firsthand. The young man at the counter asked another question, hesitant but curious. Did you ever doubt yourself, even in missions? Gaze softened with a trace of memory. Of course, she admitted. Fear is natural, doubt is natural, but you learn to acknowledge it, analyze it, and act despite it. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward while feeling it. Her words hung in the air, a quiet reminder of the discipline required in both extraordinary and ordinary moments. Across the diner, patrons began to relax, but their admiration for remained palpable. She had shown them that strength did not require volume, that mastery did not require aggression, and that confidence could exist quietly yet completely. Her actions had left a lasting impression, a living demonstration of skill, courage, and authority. People would remember not only the events, but the way she had carried herself through them, calm, composed, and unshakable. Reflected on the three men outside. They were no longer threats, they were lessons in human behavior, arrogance, and ignorance. Their fear, though perhaps embarrassing for them, was a direct consequence of their choices. She did not feel satisfaction in seeing them humbled. She felt only the affirmation that discipline and control were the most effective tools in any confrontation. Her mind, always analytical, cataloged the encounter. What worked, what could be improved, and how the lessons could apply to future scenarios. The senior officer returned briefly to thank formally. "You handled that extremely well," he said sincerely. "I don't know if I've ever seen someone neutralize three aggressors without raising their voice or causing injury. That's remarkable," nodded politely. "I do what's necessary," she said simply. Her humility was genuine. She did not seek accolades, only the assurance that order had been restored safely and efficiently. As the diner slowly returned to normal, the sense of calm and reflection lingered. Patrons resumed their breakfasts, but with a newfound appreciation for awareness, discipline, and the quiet strength that had saved the morning from chaos. Carl lingered near his table, observing with silent respect. "Most people will never understand what you just did," he said softly, "but I do, and it was extraordinary." Smiled faintly, acknowledging the respect without need for further words. Her final thought as she prepared to leave the diner was not of pride or victory, but of gratitude for the life she had lived. 20 years as a Navy SEAL had taught her to respect the power of calm, the importance of awareness, and the necessity of patience. Today had been a reminder that those principles applied beyond combat zones, even in small, seemingly ordinary moments. She had controlled chaos without harm, asserted authority without aggression, and left an indelible mark on everyone present, a living lesson in discipline and mastery. The diner had slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm. Patrons resumed their breakfasts, the clatter of plates and silverware filling the air, but the energy in the room had irrevocably changed. The three men who had caused the chaos sat quietly outside, a silent reminder of arrogance humbled. Inside, every eye seemed to linger on Warren, though no one dared interrupt her calm. She had transformed an ordinary morning into a lesson in discipline, control, and presence, not through volume or aggression, but through subtle mastery honed over 20 years as a Navy SEAL. Sipped the last of her coffee, feeling the warmth anchor her thoughts. She had navigated countless life-or-death scenarios overseas, yet the simplicity of this confrontation, the subtle human drama, resonated differently. It wasn't the violence that mattered, but the control, the restraint, the quiet authority that commanded compliance without a single punch thrown unnecessarily. Her mind cataloged the morning's events, analyzing each movement, each reaction, each subtle psychological shift. Even small victories, she knew, were worth reflection. Carl, the retired veteran who had observed her closely, leaned in quietly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low with genuine respect, "you've left a mark here today. People will talk about this for a long time, not because of a fight, but because of how you handled it. Calm, precise, in control." Offered a faint smile, her expression serene yet commanding. "That's all I ever aim for," she replied softly. "Control is not about showing off. It's about ensuring the right outcome without unnecessary harm. That's what people often miss, the power of restraint." The waitress approached, holding a fresh cup of coffee in her hands. I know you've had your coffee already, she stammered, but maybe another one. On the house for everything you've done, shook her head politely. Thank you, she said softly. I don't need anything else. I just hope people remember to stay aware not just today but every day. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience. For those who had witnessed her calm mastery, the message was clear. Awareness and discipline mattered more than force. Patrons, still processing what had happened, whispered quietly among themselves. Some spoke of the subtle cues they had noticed in her movements, the fluidity of her responses, the uncanny awareness that seemed to anticipate every possible reaction. She didn't even look like she was trying, one woman murmured, but every move was perfect. Another man nodded, adding, I've seen people train for years, and this was something else entirely. You could see the years of experience in every action. His presence had become a lesson in itself, a live demonstration of skill, focus, and discipline. A soft murmur arose as Carl spoke quietly to the nearest patrons. She's not just trained, he explained. She's a Tier 1 Navy SEAL, 20 years, combat missions, operations most of us couldn't even imagine. And yet she handled this entire situation with calm precision, without raising her voice, without unnecessary violence. That's true mastery. The room fell into reflective silence. The patrons began to understand something profound. Strength was not always loud, and heroism was often quiet. Had embodied both. Stood slowly, gathering her belongings with the same precision and calm she had displayed throughout the morning. Each movement was deliberate, measured, signaling readiness without aggression. Patrons instinctively gave her space, not out of fear but out of respect. She had not demanded admiration, yet it was freely given. The waitress, now more composed, stepped aside to allow to pass. Thank you, she said softly, for everything, for showing us what it means to stay calm and strong. Offered a brief nod, a subtle acknowledgement of the respect. The senior officer, having observed much of the aftermath, approached as made her way toward the exit. Ma'am, he said, voice formal but respectful, I don't think I've ever seen someone handle a situation so efficiently and calmly. You could have escalated it, but you didn't. That's remarkable, nodded briefly. I did what was necessary, she said. Nothing more, nothing less. Discipline and awareness matter more than force. That's a lesson worth remembering. The officer gave a subtle nod of approval, recognizing that what she had demonstrated went far beyond typical self-defense. It was a demonstration of mastery forged through decades of high-stakes experience. Outside, the morning sun bathed the diner in warm light. The three men, still seated on the curb, looked on silently as stepped onto the sidewalk. Their faces were pale, expressions mixed with fear, humility, and a dawning respect they could barely articulate. They had come in thinking she was powerless, ordinary, even weak. Now, fully aware of her experience and skill, they had learned a life lesson. Never underestimate someone whose calmness masks capability beyond imagination. Walked toward her car, each step deliberate, composed, and confident. She did not rush, but neither did she linger unnecessarily. Her presence commanded attention without demand. Patrons peeked through the diner windows, some whispering to neighbors, others simply staring in quiet admiration. She had left an indelible impression, a living demonstration of strength, restraint, and mastery. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could, and the lesson would linger long after she had gone. Carl stepped outside to watch her leave. You know, he said softly to himself, most people will never understand the kind of life she's lived, the discipline, the courage, the calm in chaos. But the ones who witnessed it today, they'll never forget. Opened the car door, glanced back briefly at the diner, and gave a faint smile acknowledgement without need for applause. Her work here was done. The chaos had been contained, lessons had been learned, and respect had been earned quietly, efficiently, and with precision. As drove away, the morning returned to normal, though the memory of the encounter lingered in the minds of everyone present. Patrons returned to their meals, whispering in awe, reflecting on the subtle yet extraordinary display they had witnessed. Even in the small, everyday setting of a roadside diner, Warren had demonstrated that calm mastery, discipline and awareness could triumph over arrogance and aggression without raising a hand unnecessarily. The three men would carry the lesson for the rest of their lives, a reminder that power is not always loud, and that discipline, control, and experience often speak louder than strength or bravado. Patrons, too, would remember the quiet strength they had seen, the calm authority, and the remarkable skill that had saved the day. And Warren, a 20-year Navy SEAL veteran, would continue her life quietly, leaving behind stories of mastery, lessons of awareness, and the indelible mark of her calm, controlled presence. As she merged onto the highway, the world continued around her, unaware of the impact she had made that morning. But for those who had witnessed it, the lesson was clear. True strength lies not in aggression, but in the ability to remain calm, controlled, and disciplined under pressure. Warren had embodied that lesson perfectly, leaving behind a story that would be told, remembered, and revered long after the diner returned to its ordinary rhythm.